What is sculpting and how to use it in SelfCAD? Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to review the basic sculpting functionality and some tips and tricks for how to use them in SelfCAD. To get started, I have here two basic objects, but as you can see I've added a lot of details to them because sculpting needs to have details. Now there's a few ways you can add details. You can add details once you go to sculpting. It actually asks you if you want to add some more details. You can decide to add details. I've already added details actually using the resolution tool, so I'm going to say no. You can also add later details. I'll show you how you add later details, but this is quite a detailed object, so everything's going to be a little slower. It has already over 150,000 faces. But before I do here something, I want to explain some basic concept of how sculpting is different than other transformations. So if we think about basic transformations, what we think about is the actions that needs to be done in order to transform something. So let's try to transform something very basic, and let's count the amount of actions we need to do. So let's say I want to make some kind of design here on this cube part. So I have to go to a selection. I can select either faces or vertices. Sculpting actually works with vertices. So I show this in vertices. Now this is so dense that if you showed all of the vertices, it looks like just simply black. So I have to zoom in even to see it. It's quite dense. Now, so I have to activate a tool that I'm going to select, and now I have to select the actual vertices that I'm going to select. So that's actually, the actual selection. Then I have to activate a transformation. It could be move, rotate, scale, or any of the deformations, bend, inflate, and any of this. And let's say I'm going to use here inflate. And now once I activate this tool, I have to decide by how much I want to inflate. Now I can enter a value directly in text box, or I can use a gizmo to decide how much to inflate, but nevertheless the action is executed once I do it. So if you see what had to be done, I had to select, had to activate a tool, and then I had to add a kind of the amount how much I wanted to do that. If you think about sculpting, all of this is happening in a single function. So let's see how this actually works in sculpting. I'll go back, see a normal view. I don't have to see the vertices. Actually, if the vertices is turned on, you will always see it, even if you're regular mode. So I'll have to turn it off, the vertices. And I'm going to sculpting now. Now, once I go to sculpting again, it asks me if I want to add more details. I have enough details. And now it takes, because it's so long, it takes a few seconds to prepare it. And now what you see over here is we have these brushes. Now, if I'm going to take first the basic brush, we call this the standard brush. It says over here, standard brush. The standard brush is quite similar to inflate. I can actually turn on the wireframe to see what's happening, but this is not a selection. If I'm going to use this, I'm not going to select anything. I'm not going to pick faces. So actually what's happening here is that the brush itself is selecting, and at the same time while it's selecting, it also does something. And there's also no value how much to do it. So this is where these settings comes in, where the option is, first of all, if you want to do it negative or positive, because if you want to do a normal inflate or any other transformation, you have the option to put it negative or positive. Here the action does it itself while moving across the brush. So let's get started. And then I have the size of the brush. Let's say I'll make it a big size, a 6D, and I'm going to give a single stroke, a stroke down, and a stroke back up. Okay. So if you look at it now from this view, you can already see what happened over here, and this is because it's positive. If I will do negative, the same thing, and kind of make a stroke up and down, you'll see it starts kind of going into. So the same brush is doing both, it's just size negative, positive. Now the amount, how much it would be doing, this is what the intensity is doing. So if I do the same thing now after upping the intensity, this will actually give me much stronger effects on each stroke down. Okay. Then you have some other settings over here, which is continuous. Continuous is, you see, first of all, this is divided, logical divider. It tells you these are all related. So the two more settings I wanted to show you, besides symmetry, which is same settings you have on others. So if I do it, turn on symmetry, I do it on one side, you can see how the second red point will show you where will be the other side. So this is basic symmetry, which is used actually a lot in sculpting. It could be very helpful. But the thing that I want to show you now here is that you have actually an option. If you turn on symmetry, you have an option actually X, Y, Z, where the symmetry should be. And this is very similar to other tools where we have symmetry. I also want to discuss something about the undo redo. I'll come back to this for a minute. But now we have the other thing is size. So I said the size here is, it's a fixed value that I entered, the size of the brush. And you can actually see it, the size of the circle. Now there's two other things that could affect the size. The first thing is that the size is the only feature in SelfCAD that actually works that way is sculpting, where the size is relative to the size of the camera. It's not a fixed size. Usually if you enter a size and everything, it's a real size. This is related to the camera. So if I'm gonna zoom this out, you can see the brush now covers the entire object. If I zoom it in, then the brush becomes smaller, and it actually behaves according to that. So there is a size plus the camera functionality. So if I'm gonna make it, let's say like this, and now go down, this is kind of, you can see it affects the entire object because I'm further out from this. And this can be very helpful, the size on different brushes, but I'll come back to this later, so just go in the order. The other thing that can affect size is the lock. I can click on the lock. If I click on the lock, the value that is entered over here, you see it's blocked because this value no longer matters, and the size actually matters how I drag it. I can set the size by dragging my mouse. So this is another way of doing it. And an inflate brush, it's not really that much important, but this is very helpful. We'll see later for alpha maps and other stuff where this lock is almost essential, that you can use it. Okay. The other thing I have over here is continuous. So I've shown you before, if I move down my stroke, I can move down one stroke, and then I can move it back up, move it back down. The thing is, if you do continuous, that will allow you to kind of go, if I can hold it down in one place, and let's say if I do something like this, and the longer I hold it, it keeps on acting. So you can see now how much this actually came out over here. So one click is one, and it's continuous. If I turn off continuous, I can let it click, and it basically doesn't, it's now, I'm clicking, it's still continuously clicking. It doesn't really go because it goes only one based on intensity. If intensity is 60, it will give it once a value of 60, and that's it. But once I do it continuous, this is gonna keep on going. Now continuous is something that could be used as a way of drawing, and it could be very helpful together with the camera. So for example, if I'm going to do continuous now here and keep on dragging out, if I would do, I don't have enough details here. So you can see now here's another problem that I want to show you. So if you see over here, there's no more, it can no longer work because despite the fact I added so many details, but now I destroyed it and I added so many. First of all, this is broken already, self-intersecting, but also there isn't enough details to make it work. So there's another setting where you have over here, which you can make it dynamic. Let's see where dynamic setting is. It's over here. It's a switcher over here that says dynamic. If I do dynamic, then as I stretch certain faces, it will keep on adding the vertices. And now continuous can continue growing this as much as I need, but then it will be a difference between how the camera works. So if I say dynamic, look how this keeps on going out, keeps on going, and I can keep on drawing it. Now continuous is not always the best brush for it. There's other brushes like drag brush or for example drag brush. I can keep on dragging it if dynamic is on, yes, and we'll keep on adding some more faces as needed, and I will be able, this is already broken, it wouldn't work, but if I start from a new place over here, you can see how I can start doing something like this. And if I zoom out and in, I should basically make it a smaller size, I think, but if I zoom out, I can start doing some smaller pieces, and then I can start doing more, and the more I zoom in and out will give me a different size how this should work. And you can see I can start drawing out pieces, and now let's say make it even smaller pieces. So you can see how I'm using the same brush size, and depending on the camera, the brush size came from this big to this small over here. So this is basically the concept over here with dynamic. So let me just recap here quickly. What happened here is that basically I have the idea that I have a fixed size, and I can change the fixed size based on over here the size, or I can use a lock option to make it like this. But then I have also the dynamic option, which will allow me to kind of make it work dynamically. Okay, so before I move ahead, I want to say something about the undo and redo. So undo and redo, the entire application saves everything. It saves every move, everything. Sculpting saves also, as you see, I've used it now, but it only saves it in the application. If I'm going to close it, it will remember only, I'm going to cancel it now, but even if I save it, it will remember only one step, my last step. So if you want to keep a lot of things in sculpting, the idea here is that you want to basically close it multiple times and then bring it back on. So let's say if I'm going to do now, let's say go to a drag brush, and let's make it dynamic, and I'm starting to create something over here and start drawing, and let me zoom out, something bigger, smaller, so I can start doing. And if I start drawing something like this, and now if I'm going to close it, let's say save it, so what happened now is this is actually saving nice, but if I do now undo, this is one step. It's one step to undo the entire thing. So if I wanted to have more steps, then I would need to close the sculpting every time. Okay, so before I go ahead, let me just explain also the other thing is that dynamic is something that's not available on all of the brushes. Some of the brushes have dynamic. So for example, this one, smooth brush, also has it, and flat brush, but not all of them have it. But there's also something called remesh. So dynamic is kind of dynamically remeshing, and you have something called remesh, which will basically act very similar to Magic Fix that you see over here in the tools. I have a separate video explaining Magic Fix on the same playlist. I'm posting this. And this is kind of an old version actually SelfCAD had for Magic Fix. It's a kind of a basic version that you find in many applications Magic Fix. The thing is SelfCAD has actually improved the Magic Fix with a lot more advanced use cases, but we left in sculpting the old Magic Fix for a purpose because there were some use cases this was better or whatever other reason. So this was left over here. In many cases actually you can use this and just set the tolerance the same way you would set the tolerance in Magic Fix. In many cases you just want to close the application, use Magic Fix, and it's anyways better for the undo redo and then come back to the application. But if you have dynamic, you need that less often because you can just make it dynamically add the details. But Magic Fix is not just for adding details, it's also for fixing self-intersections and a lot of stuff that can happen in the sculpting. Okay, so with that said, basically I've explained the continuous, which is also something that can continuously go over. And now let me explain the other features over here, which you have front vertices only. So the way this works, if you see the brush, it looks like a circle, but in reality it's more like a sphere. So it's a 3D shape. The brush is a 3D shape. So if I have 20, that means it goes in 20 actually deep also, goes in all over. So what if I have a very tiny object that is less than 20? In this case, it may be sculpting from both sides, the front and back, both of the sides, and maybe I want to have it only in the front. So this is where front vertices comes in. If it's off, then it will affect everything. I'm not sure how deep I can go. Yes, I can go here deep. So if I do something like this, let's see if I try doing something like this, and it actually, okay, this object is smaller, so it should be able to affect from the other side as well. I'm actually not able to do it now to affect the other side. Yeah, actually it does. You can see over here it affected over here also, so it does affect the other side. If I have front vertices only, usually that's what you want. This will affect only the front where you are working with. Okay, the other functions you have over here is let's see, I covered already continuous. So every brush is different. Let me see that the standard brush has more settings. So you have front vertices only, you have clay and accumulate. Clay and accumulate is really not relevant if continuous is on, because continuous is much more powerful. If I do something like this, it keeps on going up. But if you have continuous off, the clay will make it more smoother. It will give you a different effect if you use clay. And the same accumulate will allow you to accumulate if you go over the same thing. Let me turn on clay and accumulate off. If I do, let's say, a stroke like this, it will kind of, I'll have to go over, and if I go over the same thing, it will affect it less than if accumulate is on. So if accumulate is on, it kind of does differently. To be honest, I don't know exactly how it works, but yeah, you can see the difference goes out much more. So there's kind of like subtle differences, and it's hard to explain it on a basic primitive. In real design with real objects, this makes a big difference, the clay and accumulate. And these are standard functions you find in most sculpting applications. But this is kind of the behavior, the way the fall-off works. It's the clay, it's kind of more smoother, and the accumulate is more about how it goes when you go the second time over on the same location, how it behaves. But continuous kind of overrides everything because it keeps on going continuously, so it doesn't really matter, the accumulate and these type of features. But again, not all of these features are available on all of the brushes anyhow. So that's basically what you see over here. The other thing I want to show you here is that if you're really going to use it for more complex things and building out stuff, you're most likely going to need to add more workspaces. So in the workspace setting, there's an option to add different viewports, and in this case you can add, let's say, 4 viewports, and you can set this to the front, let's say, and this maybe to the other side, like this side, and you know, keep the different sides. So it gives you a much better control to see how you move it continuously, and yeah, keep on moving on this. So this is in general, when you draw things in kind of complex in 3D, you want to have more viewports to see what's happening. And so that's basically it. Okay, so let's go back to sculpting. I mistakenly closed it. So okay, so let's take a look at the other brushes as well. So if you have the crease brush, is something that I actually want to show you how this could be used in conjunction. So the crease brush is something that it's kind of moving together vertices. So think about if you have over here something, and I'm just gonna crease them together, kind of squeezing the things together. Okay, and that's actually, no, crease actually is making a kind of a pinch. You can make it you know, in or out, something like that. Okay, and actually a pinch brush, I think the names actually intuitively may mean differently. The pinch brush is kind of, you see, it just moves the vertices, but depending where you are, if you are in a corner, moving them will actually affect the shape of the object. But if you're on a flat surface, it's just moving the faces, it's not really making a big deal. If you make it on a positive way, let's say something like this, I can make it continuous, be easier to see. You can see how it kind of brings together all of the faces together. Now this could be used in tandem with other tools. So for example, now I want to move these faces, so now I can keep on moving them away, and I get a much nicer shape, a different shape than if I would have without moving the vertices. And obviously if you do it something like this, if you move these faces on a corner, it actually affects the corner, and you can kind of use it to make it a round corner and so on. Again, I'm not an artist, these are artistic tools, and these are mostly standard null brushes, just showing you a little bit of behavior on how they work. And then you have the twist brush, which is, yeah, quite simple. You twist something, and you have the move and drag, which I've just shown. You can move faces, move it around, and you can drag something places and so on. And drag is where dynamic brush is quite helpful, because you can use it then to draw pieces out while you drag. You keep on drawing, and it keeps on adding faces, so it doesn't stretch out. You don't have to use magic fix or remesh continuously. You can just dynamically keep on adding faces. And this, by the way, will also connect. This actually, you need magic fix now. Dynamic is just adding, not connecting them. But if you kind of intersect two pieces, you then have to use magic fix to connect them. As a general rule, this is always when you break an object over and over, make it too bad. You should never wait until it's like too much, because then magic fix may have an issue fixing it. If you find things like that, and once you have a few broken places, it's good to just remesh it, and that's it. There's also something you can turn on, backface coloring, and see if they start self-intersecting. In this case, looks like there's nothing. It is actually not connected even here, but yeah, you can kind of make them, solder them together and whatever. So it's basically, again, this is more artistic tool, so it's hard for me to show real use cases, but the concept is obviously the same, and this is what it could be used. Okay, so let's see here. The other important things I actually want to show is the idea, a few important things. So first of all, the masking idea. So besides these brushes over here, we have a flatten brush, which is actually quite nice. You can flatten certain things. It's the same thing as the flatten tool over here, almost the same concept. You can start flattening stuff. You can see I removed these dots over here, which is quite nice. And you have a smooth brush. Smooth brush is actually similar to round objects, but it's different. Round objects is adding smoothing by adding more details, and I have a video on this as well on round objects, by adding it. This can actually smooth without adding. So you see, I already have a lot of details, but because I've added them using simple resolution to add, it didn't really smooth out on the sphere. I'm talking on the sphere. You can still see the kind of edges over here. Now obviously I can add a smooth shader, you wouldn't see it, but if you want to really smooth it out, this is already too complex. Already have 300,000 faces between them. This is really complex how you smooth it out. So this is actually where smooth brush can come handy. So I can simply go over it, and you can see over here how this smooths out everything. So it's not adding any faces, it's just smoothing them out. It's just moving these vertices in a way that it will smooth them out, and so on. In some cases you can use, there's an option over here, smooth all, a button smooth all. It's good for some cases, some not. I can actually try it if it will help. It's not always working. Yeah, in this case, you would better off doing it yourself. Smooth all is not really smoothing it as good. It smooths at some point, but not completely. So this is actually really helpful, a smooth brush. Okay, and the next thing here is where you have the option to mask. And mask is something also really helpful in sculpting, and in SelfCAD this is unique. The way it works is that you can work between the application and this. So let me show you what masking is. So first of all, what is masking? The idea of masking is that if you want to use a brush, any brush, and you want to mask where it should not work. So let's say if I want to have here some details where it should work on everything except here. So I'm adding a mask, which is kind of hiding these faces. And now I'll go, let's say, to a standard brush, and I give it a big brush, an intensity, and I'm going over this, and I'm moving the entire object. And look what happens. It actually moved out everything, but the mask stayed in, which in result made it look like a curvature over here, because it moved everything surrounding except the mask, because the mask basically hid these faces, made it lock. It's kind of locking these faces in place. Okay, so what will happen if I close this now? If I close this application now, look what happened if I close it. What happened here is that it selects everything except what has been masked. Okay, so in this case the mask was, the transformation was too big, it covered everything. So actually let me show it on a simple object, how I can show it in this as well, not a problem. I'm going to show it first the opposite way, where I'm going to select pieces over here. So I'm going to select pieces over here using the application to select pieces, and then I'm going to enter sculpting. And what will happen here is that the sculpting will automatically attach a mask to everything except this. So now you can see I can use a technical selection. The general application has more technical selection. It will be difficult to add a mask like this, or if you do any other complex selections we have, and I have some other video about selection, you can make a lot of really complex selections in SelfCAD, and this is selecting only what's under the brush. So using this method allows you to select pieces, and then you can use any other brush to basically go over, and so it will affect only this. And now if I close it, you'll see basically it's selected, it sculpted only these spaces that I've done, and the others were left intact. You can also do this to heavy objects, it takes long, so I'll replace it with another object to show the concept more faster. So I'm going to take a basic object. Let's just add some segments on both sides, all sides. Okay, and now if I go to sculpting, if you see over here, let's say the mask, the same idea over here, where I'm going to add a mask. Let's make it a big size, so I can add a big mask over here. Okay, so this is masked over here, and now there's also an option here to inverse the mask. You see I can inverse the mask. So now basically everything is masked, only this. And now if I'm going to close it, you see over here it actually selected only this. So now let's say if we're going to go extrusion, I can extrude only the pieces that has been selected in the mask. So this could be used in both ways. You can either select in the sculpting and it will select the mask, or this way. So let's say if I'm selecting here over here this, and because I want this to be selected, so technically this means that only this should sculpt, everything else should be a mask. So this is how it's going to work. It's going to apply a mask to everything except this. So now I can sculpt only this section, and yep, so that's basically it. Okay, one more other important thing is the idea of alpha maps, and this is really helpful in many cases. So the idea here is you have an option to use a pattern, and what a pattern is, you can use something that's, you can have some, very few actually. SelfCAD doesn't have a lot of saved patterns over here, but you can upload your own image. And a pattern is something that you can add something. So let's see, try what we have. So I have, let's say, a square. If I'm adding over here, and this is where the lock, I've said before, this is where lock is very important. So if I'm going to add, let's say, a lock over here, I can drag it out. So you can see I'm adding this square onto the mesh, and I can also rotate it. If I follow this circle, so let's say I can rotate it, position it like this, and you see over here that basically it added a pattern. I need to do, I think it's better if I increase the intensity, so it should be easier to see. So if I add, let's say, the same lock over here, you can see this, and let me rotate it, and you can see over here. So this basically adds this kind of box over here. Now there's other patterns we have here. There's very few we have. You have a skin. I can add a skin to it, make it look like skin, and this kind of makes the entire mesh kind of look like a skin. Now to make something look nice like this, I would need to add a lot more details. I have only 1000 faces. This is not nearly enough. Usually sculpting is eating faces. You have to add 100,000, not 1000, to make it look nice. And the same with wrinkles, for example. You can make it look like wrinkles and other stuff. But you can add any image over here. You can just select an image, import, and that basically will give you a thing. But you have to design an alpha map, and there's hundreds of videos online to see how to design alpha map. And again, this is standard from any sculpting application. They all work basically the same. So that's basically, in short, an overview. It's not, SelfCAD has all of the basic brushes you will find in most sculpting applications, but it's definitely not nearly as complex as you can do in ZBrush in these places. However, with the combination of the application, the fact that you can use the masking and switch between selection in the application, the selection here, creating objects and using it here, the fact that it's combined with the general modeling application gives you more than enough capabilities, and you can basically use it as an added tool to others. So that's basically it. I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you want me to show anything else. Thank you. Bye.